Welcome to the Wet Dreams podcast. Thanks for listening so far. Today we're going to talk about shame and guilt. That's a big issue that we see with guys. I think probably everyone deals to some degree with shame and guilt, but especially with guys with out of control sexual behavior, shame and guilt is super prevalent. And you may or may not know the difference, but that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is shame and guilt and how it comes into play into like the struggles that our guys deal with. Yeah. So what is shame and guilt? Let's start there. What does that even mean?
Shame is where you feel something is wrong with you, like you're fundamentally bad, like I'm a loser, or I'll never be able to overcome this problem. Those are shame-based statements. I am defective. Guilt is the feeling that you get when you know that you've done something wrong. And so oftentimes we start with guilt, and then 1 or 2 seconds later we start feeling shame. And in my opinion, and people can argue with me, that's fine, shame is never constructive. It never accomplishes anything good, where guilt can accomplish something good if we use it to change our behavior, right? So if we know that we've done something wrong and that makes us feel guilty and we don't want to feel that way anymore, then we do something to change so we don't make that same mistake again. Otherwise, like if we feel guilty, then shame comes in and says, I did that because I'm stupid, I did it because I'm worthless, I'm never going to be able to change, like I said, So shame is destructive. Guilt can be constructive if we use it to change.
Right. Well, then, the thing I always tell guys is, if you're a bad person, or if you think I'm a bad person, how do you change that? What do you do with that? Okay, I'm a bad person, cool. As opposed to, I did this thing that's bad, I can learn from it, I can do something different next time, or whatever. But if you're a bad person, okay, the end. There's nothing you can do about that, in my opinion,
Right, and there's, when I talk about this, Spanish always comes to my mind, because Spanish has 2 different words for I am, right? There's soy, which is the permanent one, and estoy, which is temporary, right? So, guilt or shame is permanent, in my opinion, right? And we can't do anything about it. If you think I'm stupid or I'm worthless, that is it. That's forever, right? But if you say, well, I made a bad choice, then that's temporary. You can not make bad choices in the future.
Yeah. So do you feel like our guys, I say our guys, I mean the guys that we see, do you feel like our guys have more shame or more guilt, or what is that? What has been your experience?
Yeah, shame is super prevalent with the clients that I've seen. And then the reason that we're talking about this is because, in my opinion, shame, when they get into a shame-based way of thinking, they end up using more, right? They end up doing things, making choices when they're feeling shame that makes their life worse rather than better, right? Mm-hmm. So I see lots of shame in the guys that I see.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Where do you think our guys get that from, or whatever? What are some, you know what I mean, where do we get that message, those messages, the shame messages?
That's a good question. I think it comes from a lot of areas. I think that society in general doesn't allow little boys to process their emotions the way that it allows little girls. Generally speaking, of course, there are lots of exceptions to both of those, but generally speaking, we don't allow boys to feel emotions or process emotions. We say things like big boys don't cry, and don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about, or win at all costs and stuff like we give these messages that doesn't allow people to feel feelings or process their feelings. And so then when they have feelings, they don't know what to do with them. right? So they do things to kind of cover that up. Where so that's one area it can come from. I think that even internally, shame can take hold and grow, because if we don't want to make a certain choice and then we make that choice, then we think, well, there must be something wrong with me because I keep making this choice that I don't want to make. So then that's kind of self-perpetuating shame inside the person, right? So and change is hard. So it's easier to say there's something wrong with me because then I don't have to change, right? It's harder to say, oh, I keep making this choice that's destructive. How about I change and work to overcome that? Which is much harder. It's just easier to say, I'm defective. I get to keep doing this because there's something wrong with me.
Well, I also think, like, as guys, generally speaking, like, the action or the things that you do is so ingrained or so connected to who you are. I don't know if that's like a overall like a guy thing, like, you know what I mean? You're useful, so then you're a useful person or whatever. You're, like, it's so connected to who you are as a person, the things that you do. So that makes sense, where then if you're doing something bad, of course you're a bad person, because that's kind of the mindset that you have generally anyways, it's that usefulness, like men need to be useful to be valued, or that idea of like your actions are who you are or whatever.
Right.
I think that's like a big thing too.
Yeah. Well, and I think as males we get a lot of worth from our accomplishments, right? And so when we make choices that we're not happy with, then that's kind of an anti-accomplishment, right? So it makes it more difficult to make positive decisions when we've made a negative decision, because that shame tells us that that's who we are and that we can't do any better. But we can, right? Like we can. I wish that making a positive choice had as much impact on us as making negative choices did.
That's true.
We tend to forget all the positive choices we made. We got up this morning. We hopefully took a shower, right? So those are good choices, but we forget those. We remember the bad choices that we made.
Well, that makes me think. Also, like, the question in my mind is like, what does shame look like, or what are some of the shame thoughts? I think what I've found is it's hard to identify the the idea of like I'm a bad person. It's kind of like a big kind of nebulous, like touchy-feely kind of thing. But I know often one thing I'll have guys do is being aware of smaller like shame statements or shame language that you're using. So I just wonder, what are some examples of like even the smaller ones, like like I'm a bad person, I'm a bad husband, I'm a bad partner. Those are kind of like bigger, kind of harder things to identify. But what are some of the smaller ones that you've seen people using?
Well, like, I'm never going to get better, right? I can't change this. I can't get better. I can't stop doing whatever this behavior is that I want to stop doing. For many of our people, it's porn. That I can't. There's this, I can't change. I can't get better. I can't make better choices. It's when people say that, you're right, because you're perpetuating that, right? I always tell the story of like if you're teaching a 5-year-old how to play basketball, and you say you're never gonna hit that basket, you're not throwing the ball hard enough, it's you're awful, you're never gonna change, right? If we say stuff like that to a little kid, of course they're never gonna play basketball again, right? because we just defeated them before they got started. And I think a lot of times we do that to ourselves. We tell ourselves that we're awful or worthless or we can't do something. Well, you're right, because you just told yourself you can't.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy, for sure. Yeah, definitely. How do we see, I think we're talking mainly about guys with out of control sexual behavior, what does shame look like overall too? Just like sexual shame, whether that's with the guys that we see or couples or whatever. What are some examples of those you think? Kind of bringing it out to a bigger picture.
Well, I think that ultimately it can lead to erectile dysfunction. It can lead to sexual performance issues because I think changes in our ability to perform is common. Like almost all men have some kind of an issue at some point in their lives, but the more we dwell on that, the more it becomes a problem, right? Because if we're focused on, am I going to be able to function? Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be successful? Am I going to orgasm? When we start focusing on that, then it causes that it exacerbates that problem, right? It makes it more common and worse because we're not focused on what we're doing. We're focused on whether we're going to be able to do it, and so I think that's one problem that it creates. It also can create this shame, pervasive shame can create problems in a relationship as well, right? Because if you think that you're a loser, then you're going to start questioning why your partner doesn't think that you're a loser, right? Or whatever it is, the thought that you have. And so then that can kind of quickly turn into, you do think that I'm a loser, but it came from I think that I'm a loser.
Right.
And then you don't, but then somehow you must think I'm a loser because I think I'm a loser.
Right. And everyone thinks that I'm a loser or should think that I'm a loser. Yeah,
then you go around thinking, well, everybody thinks that, right? And so now I shouldn't even leave my house or I shouldn't engage with people because when really that statement kind of came from within us. Yeah. And then we're kind of spreading it out among all the people that we know.
Well, it's like a domino effect. I mean, like another example I'm thinking of is like, if a guy thinks their penis is small and they're an inadequate man or whatever, then you're gonna act like you have a small penis, or you're gonna act inadequate more than that. Whether that's with your partner or whatever, like because you're coming from that assumption of like, yeah, I'm inadequate. Which, by the way, like most guys think their penis is small, anyways. Right? I think it's like 85%. I forget the statistic, but most guys do, so you're coming from that baseline of like, yeah, I'm not enough,
Yeah. Well, it's good that you brought that up. Because it is, like in porn, the average penis size is about 2 inches bigger than what the average penis size really is among real people. And so, like if we're constantly looking at that and then we start comparing ourselves to what we're seeing, and so like I tell my clients, well, porn isn't real, right? Like that's not the way people have sex, that's not the way people interact with each other, that's many people when they're sexual with their partners, they don't do it the way that it's done in porn. And so like porn is just a really poor teacher, and we should not compare ourselves to what we see in porn. It's like saying, should you learn how to drive by playing Grand Theft Auto video game? Like it's no, we know it's not real, right? But then with porn, we're like, well, this is real, right? And I'm not like, I don't look like that, and I don't act like that, and so maybe I should. Well, you're modeling your life after something that's not real. These people are actors, right? And of course they choose people who have disproportional body parts because that's what people consume. And so it makes good money, and so that's the people they film. But that is not the typical person.
Well, it's like any other entertainment. Like it makes me think of like wrestling, like WWE or whatever. Yeah. Everyone's like super muscular and super in shape. Is the point. Like they're getting those type of people for the entertainment purposes. So of course they're gonna get people that have abs and have huge penises and whatever, and women with large breasts and stuff like that. Of course, because it's for entertainment purposes,
Right. So I think media, porn and other media, it creates these unrealistic images, which then can kind of prompt shame to occur, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't look like that and I don't act like that and I don't get all the girls like the guys doing porn, and there's just a lot of these negative messages that kind of turn into shame.
Mm-hmm. What's been your experience with shame coming from like trauma in guys or something like that, whether that's sexual trauma or trauma otherwise? I'm just curious, what's been your clients like in that way? Have you had?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that trauma reinforces the negative messages that we have, right? It's like, I think some people are prone to thinking shameful messages like I'm not good enough, and that really is a male and female thing. Like it's a human thing, right? Like I'm not good enough. Not everybody has that, but some people can. And then when we have trauma, that's evidence for our brain. See, there is something wrong with me because this person did something traumatic to me. So there must be something wrong with me because I attracted this trauma, right? And then that with some people can become like the basis of shame and guilt from then on, because we have this evidence that there's something bad about me, when really that there's something bad about me is wrong. Like the person that did the trauma to you, whatever that trauma was, that's the person who has a problem and should feel shameful and guilty.
Right.
Not you as the receiver of that trauma.
Right. Well, it's interesting you talked about the coming from the baseline of shame and then that coming out to someone. It's like a similar experience where that person that has the issue did something to someone, and then now you've transferred that, like now you have the issue, like even though it was from that person that was perpetuating the trauma, It's so weird.
Now you have all my trauma, now you have to deal with it, now you have all my shame.
Here you go, pass it along. Yeah, definitely. For sure. Well, and that's, and that's a hard evidence to say, like, to go against, like, that experience or that, cluster of experiences, often years or whatever, like, of sexual trauma. That's a hard thing to be like, oh, that evidence is invalid, like, but it happened, and it's a tough, like, thing for people to shake, I think.
Well, and it's, that you bring up a good point there, too, that these things that we, like, make up in our brain that we believe to be true, it's harder to convince somebody that something that they made up in their mind is not true. It's harder to convince them that's not true than actual facts. Women are bad drivers, right? Like if we believe that, and we can show statistics that show that's not true, people will reject the statistics. They'll reject scientific research. They'll reject science. They'll reject whatever in favor of their own made-up truth that they believe in their head, right?
Right.
So facts don't matter. It's just what I believe.
Yeah, right. And they may cite, like in that example, taking it further, they may cite, well, there was that one time that I got into an accident with a woman, and she was driving poorly. Like, that's, again, similar to the trauma thing. Like, that's the evidence, and I don't care who tells me otherwise. Like, that was my experience, Yeah.
Well, yeah, because then what were you doing in that instance? You're taking one data point, and you're extrapolating, this is all people now. This is this whole classification of people who do these bad things, right? When it's not, for example, another one is all men cheat, right? Like there's that, people believe that based on their 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 people that they've had that have cheated in their life, and then they're taking those data points and extrapolating it and making it truth, a universal truism like gravity, right?
Right. So it seems like there's like this, like the visual I'm getting is like this narrowing of, like, shame makes you narrow. I don't know if that makes sense, but So my thought is like, okay, what are some things that can help shame? And a thought of having is expanding the information. You know what I mean? If you're coming from a place where this is my only experience, like what are some other things I can consider? That's maybe one way to look at it. But anyways, the question is, what are some things that can help shame or help our guys with shame or anyone? But I mean, we're mainly talking about our dudes, our guys. What are some things that can help with shame?
It's another great question.
There we go. I'm killing it.
when I'm working with somebody about their internal shame messages, I tell them first you have to catch yourself doing it, right? And so I tell them literally like write it down in your phone, like just day and time, and this is the message that I had, right? Like I'm too stupid to pass this class or whatever, right? Like just catch yourself noticing those shame messages that you have. And like really that's the assignment that I give them for like a week or two or three. Like just keep noticing when you do this. You don't have to do anything about it, just notice it. And then after they get used to noticing it, and I know they're ready for the next step when they come back and they say stuff like, I didn't realize how many of these things, how often I do this, or how many shame messages I have. And I'm like, okay, now you're ready for the next step. And so then the next step with the work that I do is having them start to gently argue with that, right? So when they catch themselves making a shame-based statement, ask themselves, is this really true, right? Like, am I really stupid? Or am I really incompetent? Or am I really, like, whatever the shame-based statement is, am I really that? Whatever that thought is telling you that you are. Again, you're not, like, punching yourself in the head or anything like that. You're just saying, am I really? Right? Or did I just make a mistake? Right? Did I just forget something? Or did I stay up all night watching Netflix instead of studying for this test that I failed? Right? Right? Am I really this permanent thing or am I a temporary thing? Right? And so then they practice that for a few weeks of just kind of gently questioning, and then I have them incorporate an alternative message, right? So like I said, first is noticing or catching yourself doing it, then move into gently arguing with it, and then ultimately you will put a replacement there. So I'm not stupid, I just have too much on my mind, or I'm too stressed, or I have poor time management, right? All things that you can do something about, right? So replace it with something that you can do something about, so a temporary condition rather than a permanent condition. And I seem to have a success, or my clients seem to have success doing that when they kind of go through that 3-step process.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that idea. Another thing that I like to tag on to that is that last part about you saying a replacement thought. I like to tell guys, like, replace it with a neutral thought. It doesn't have to be like, okay, the thought is like, I'm terrible. It doesn't have to be like, I'm amazing and I do everything right. You know what I mean? Like, that's not realistic necessarily. Right. I mean, you may get to that point. Sure, that'd be awesome. But it may just be a neutral thing, like, I just didn't do well. I could have done something different. Like, it's still not necessarily a positive thought, but it's more of a neutral thought than the idea that you're terrible. You know what I mean? Yep. And even that is a movement towards having healthier thoughts. Yep.
And that's a good point, because like I tell my clients, it has to be something that can stick, right? It has to be something that you can say to yourself and believe it, right? So if you're going around saying I suck, you telling yourself that I'm amazing, it's not really going to have an effect because you don't believe that, right? But saying maybe I don't suck, maybe I just had a bad day, or maybe I just made a bad choice or a series of bad choices. That's different than saying I'm amazing. You're not going to believe that. You're not going to do a complete 180. And,
right.
I mean, hopefully that could be a goal, like
Right.
to turn yourself around after you reprogram your brain. But doing that overnight, that's a Hollywood mentality of, the doctor. I call it the Dr. Phil mentality, right? In 27 minutes we can fix everybody's problems and with commercials and everybody's fine. But life doesn't really work that way. It takes a lot of effort and continual kind of repetition to learn these new lessons and to override the negative programming that you've developed over years.
Yeah, and you didn't develop those processes whatever overnight, so they're not gonna go away overnight. And I think another thing that could be useful is like being kind to yourself. It sounds like cheesy and blah 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 whatever, but it is truly like giving yourself some slack. Like it didn't happen overnight. It's not gonna change overnight. It's gonna take some time. So if you're still having shame messages, that's fine. It's okay. Like just keep at it. Keep trying to get some consistency into changing those thoughts.
Because that reminds me of the perfectionism thing, right? Like we, like a lot of the guys that we deal with, they have this perfectionism streak in them. And again, that's not exclusive to just guys. A lot of females have perfectionist streaks too. But, guys will walk in the door and they want help and they want to get better like yesterday. They want, like I've had people say to me, I'll be better after one session, right? And I'm like, you didn't get this way in an hour. I can't fix it in an hour, right? Like it's like I said a minute ago, it takes kind of repetition and doing the same thing over and over again, because that's how we got into this place of shame-based messages, is that you constantly kind of sent that shame message to yourself. So it takes time to rewrite that and overcome that and change that way of thinking. And it's hard. Like I tell my clients, it's hard. It's difficult because you are overriding all that stuff, right? It takes a lot of effort, and then people get tired of trying, and then they lapse or they relapse. But that doesn't mean, because I've had clients say, now I'm back at ground zero. No, that's not what that means, right? You can't unlearn things that you've learned. Like you already have the tools and skills, you just stop using them temporarily. So start using them again,
Right,
and build on it and learn more stuff, and then you can overcome it. Like that's the fascinating things about our brains. We can learn anything if we try hard enough and learn and keep repeating the lessons and keep practicing and all that kind of stuff. Like we know. Like people that are listening to this, they know how they learn and that they know they can learn.
Yep.
We just believe that. Like that's another weird thing. Like these internal messages that we have, we just believe them. And if somebody walked up to us and said those things, we'd be like, "Get out of here! You're crazy," right? But because it came from inside our head, we believe it. Whatever it says.
Yeah.
I'm a loser. Oh, okay, I'm a loser. Must be true because it's in my head. Right? Like, no, you need to start questioning that, like as if somebody told you that. Right?
Yeah. That's a good intervention. Well, that what you were talking about kind of leads me to the next part of my thought is like, there's that idea or that pressure, I suppose, to like get better faster. And I think some things that I've seen often, and we're talking about stereotypical heterosexual couples and the guys that come in here. Often I'll see both the pressure individually from the guy, like I want to get better, but I often see there's a pressure often because something bad has happened or a partner has discovered porn or whatever, and now there's this pressure like, okay, you have to go get better quick, or both. I think it's both the partner saying like you need to get better and then the individual saying I want to get better quick for the partner. What are some things that partner can do if it's a partnered relationship to help the shame, or just thoughts about that whole like interaction of partner where the partner comes into that point,
Well, there's two things that are that I want to say, and they're fighting for which one I'm going to say first. Like, I think that when a person does something and they get caught, right? And then that drives them, so go get counseling, I'm going to leave you, or go get counseling, or this relationship is over. Our clients then dwell on that event in the past, right? They're stuck on that thing that happened a week ago when they first show up for the first session, and then it's a month ago, and then it's 6 months ago. They're constantly focused on that thing in the past. And I tell them, I use the analogy of driving a car. I'm like, you're driving your car looking in the rearview mirror. Like, you're constantly focused on that thing in the past that you did. You need to focus on the future, right? How is your future going to be different? How are you going to make different choices in the future? How are you going to arrange circumstances so it's not so easy for you to use in the future? Use meaning look at porn, if that's what you're trying to give up.
Right.
Like we need to change that perspective. Shame is very past focused. Guilt can be future focused. That's when guilt is healthy, is if it's future focused. Like, what am I going to do differently? I don't like this feeling. Let's not feel this feeling anymore. That can be the useful part of guilt. Shame is always past focused. You did this bad thing in the past. You will always do this bad thing again. Which is probably not exactly what you were asking, but
sure,
it reminded me of that. I wanted to say
yeah, definitely.
And now let me answer your question. Like, as far as partners, it's a difficult, like what I'm about to say is difficult to pull off. But I think we ask our clients to, like, everything we're asking them to do is really difficult. But partners, the most effective partner response is affirmation and support, right? And like, in a former life, I was an elementary teacher years and years ago. And when I was doing my elementary school training, they would say, catch them being good, right? And so I tell the partners of my clients, you need to catch them being good, and affirm them for that, right? The hard part is, because I've heard this from many, many, many partners over the years of my clients, they don't want to affirm them because they don't want them to think everything is okay. And I tell them, you're going to have the opposite effect, right? By not affirming them, it's going to make them more likely to use because they feel crappy about themselves. And people who are addicts use to feel better, right? And so if you affirm them and say, I see you trying, I see you making changes, I want to encourage you to keep doing that, to keep making these changes. And so, that's great that you're making changes. So affirmation is probably the biggest thing that a partner can do to help the person with the issue that they're coming to see us for.
And it's like sorry to interrupt. It's like a moth to a flame is the thought I had of like what affirmation means to these guys. It's like, oh my God, give me more. You know what I mean? Like you're in the headlights, like, please give me more. When they actually get that true, especially from their partners whom they've maybe broken trust with or whatever. It's insane the power that has. But continue.
And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to pornography and consume it with such quantity that they're veracity that they're coming to us for, right? That if it's such a problem that they have to seek therapy for it, I think that's why they're going to it, because porn is always there, it's always available, it's never on its period, it never has a headache, it's never tired, it's never feeding the kids, it's never busy. It always gives me exactly what I want, right? We can search for specific things, and like if we're into feet, we can search for feet, and it's always there, and it always gives me, it always affirms me, right? And porn is filmed from the point of view of the consumer. Like, it's as if you're there, and so you hear all those affirmations in porn, and so in your brain takes that in as if it's talking to you, right? And so I really think that if the person if porn has become such a problem that they're seeking therapy for it, it's become, they're doing that to get affirmation. They're doing it to get human contact. They're doing it to be told that they're good enough, right? And so if they get those messages from outside, there could be less of a tendency to move towards porn, because now I'm getting those needs met outside of porn.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And I think concurrently is, I think someone can hear that and be like, well, so I'm replacing porn for them, or as the partner, I'm the one that's giving the affirmation. I think also it's both the individual, like the guys, we're pushing guys to get those needs met in other ways, but as a partner, you can help in that, in that path or in that journey of also adding more affirmation to them, you know what I mean? So that it's not like, because I know that's like a thought of like, like, it wasn't my fault, he's the one that did it, like, why should I affirm him, or why should I, or I'm hurt. I mean, I get it, you know what I mean? But you can either help the situation or make it worse.
That's what I was going to say. Like, it is, I've heard those comments from people. Like, I'm not the one with the problem, right? I didn't make him do this. So why should I do anything to help him? Well, you're in his life, you're present. So you're either going to help or you're going to harm. So that's the choice that you have to make, right? Yeah. Am I going to be helpful in this situation, or am I going to make it harder, more difficult to overcome? And most partners want to help, they just don't know how to help, or they get into that feeling of, like I said earlier, I'm not going to affirm this person or comfort them because they hurt me, right? And I don't want them to think everything's okay. So they pull back on that. Same thing with sex, right? Like when couples are mad at each other, sex is the first thing that stops. For hopefully not very long, a day or two or whatever, but sometimes it's years, right? That and that can also have a deleterious effect on them, their sobriety, and they're getting better, because you're withholding the only thing that males have received over time as a form of love is physical touch, right? So I've probably said this before in here, that we stop touching males when they're young, probably about 9 or 10 years old. We stop wrestling and hugging and kissing and all those kinds of things. So then the only physical touch they get is through sex. And so when you withhold sex to a male, that means you don't love them anymore. Because that's the only way they got physical touch, is through being sexual. Which is why I hear all the time from female partners, all he wants me for is sex. And I'm like, no, that's the only way he gets physical affection. And so, because we stopped hugging and kissing and stuff like that, right? So it's really, to me, people do not use porn to the level our clients are using porn just because they're horny. They're doing it to get love and affirmation and physical touch and all those things that they're craving that we don't ask for. That's a whole nother issue, probably another podcast. Is we don't ask for what I need.
Yep, that's a couple future podcasts on the side note, the porn podcast, and the asking sexual communication. We'll get there, but but it's true. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I mean, and those are future podcasts. I think we'll delve in some more about porn for sure. And it's a hard thing to do, like when you're hurting, then to give someone affirmation. Like, I get it, we get it. Like, it's tough, and it's like, and it sucks. Like, that's not the first thing that you think about when someone hurts you. Like, oh, okay, let me go and like hug them, or like, you know what I mean? So it's not easy. But in our experience, it helps, and it makes the progress and the process better. Right. And our guys' recovery, it makes it better, you know, generally.
Well, and we know that when it's not porn that we're talking about. Like if somebody has surgery, right? Or if they disclose a cancer diagnosis, the first thing we say is, you're going to be okay, right? But we don't do that when people are in therapy. Or as a partner, we don't do that when our partner has an issue that they're struggling with. We don't tell them, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? But we know it works because we do it all the time with other things.
Yep.
Like even if our kid has a test, you're going to do fine. You're going to do great. Right? We tell them positive messages because we know it works. But somehow with sexual addiction, the rules change. And that's a whole nother topic, is that, because I say this all the time to my clients, like if you're addicted to alcohol or you're addicted to gambling, your partner wouldn't feel that it's their fault, or they wouldn't withhold sex, or they wouldn't, a lot of these problems would not be present if the addiction were some other addiction, right? But because it's a sexual addiction, then the partners somehow feel, well, he's doing that because I don't look good enough, or I'm not giving him enough sex, or whatever, or I'm not, and then they turn that into, I'm not going to affirm him because he hurt me, where we wouldn't necessarily think that if they were addicted to alcohol or gambling or something, right? So it's, the brain doesn't care what you're addicted to. The chemicals and the parts of your brain that light up are the same, whether it's heroin or alcohol or gambling or hoarding or whatever the addiction is. The same parts of your brain light up. And so we should treat them the same as partners that we would if, about whether your partner's hired a lawyer or whether you're ever going to see your children again, that makes working on this issue difficult, right? Because your focus, you're being pulled in 7 different directions rather than focusing on getting better. And so that can be a distraction. I'm not saying, I want to be clear, that if your partner has violated your relationship covenant, you have that choice to leave, that's fine. But holding the threat over somebody's head is a distraction to them getting better.
Exactly.
Like if this is a deal breaker for you, then terminate the relationship and move on. And then our clients can focus on getting better.
Yeah.
But, I mean, certainly they'll be devastated, but then we can help them with that. Yeah. But this constant...
It's better. It's better than just having it land over their shoulder.
Right.
In the long run.
And our clients will know. They'll say, like, I just want to know. Right? I just want to know what is happening so that I can deal with it. But not knowing is harder.
Awesome. Yeah, so we talked about shame, and like we said, we got a couple podcasts in the works. Are there any other final thoughts or any resources that you use, books or something like that our guys can, specifically about shame and that kind of stuff? Any thoughts? If not, that's fine, but figured I'd ask.
Specifically about shame. Treating Pornography Addiction by Kevin Skinner is a good book. Treating Pornography Addiction by Kevin Skinner. I'm just repeating that because I said it really fast. And so it's a small book. but it's one of the best books that I've read. He talks about shame and guilt in there, and so that's the best resource that I have off the top of my head, and I'm not earning any money by reading that book. So just self-disclosure there.
Brene Brown, a lot of her books talk about shame and stuff like that too.
I've had clients that have actually come in and they've discovered Brene Brown's work on their own. So she's a powerful shame author. And so, like, she talks about in her books that she didn't want to research shame. She didn't want because she's from Texas, and she goes into that whole story. But yeah, she's a really good author.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you guys in the next one. Feel free to shoot any concerns, questions, thoughts. We're always down to get the feedback. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Here's just a tip. Here are some tips to differentiate between shame and guilt. 1. Focus on the source of the feeling. Guilt is typically tied to a specific action or behavior, whereas shame is a more pervasive feeling about yourself as a person. 2. Pay attention to self-talk. Guilt thoughts are more likely to focus on the action or behavior itself, whereas shame thoughts tend to be more self-critical and judgmental of your character. 3. Examine the intensity and duration of the thoughts. Guilt tends to be a more temporary emotion. Shame can linger for longer periods of time and feel more intense. You perceive others' judgments about you.
The Wet Dreams podcast and any content posted is intended for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes only. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining a medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.